Until they bring the streetcars back. Chapter 37. I doused the light and turned down the alley, and my heart was going faster than an engine. Be there, I prayed out loud. In the shadows, I coasted to the garage and left the engine idling while I dragged the sprung door open. I fumbled my way over the junk in the pitch black and brushed against something hanging from the rafters that scared the zippers off me. But I found the stash just the way I'd left it, and I was really happy. Geez, I tripped and stumbled in and out of the garage and loaded the liquor as fast as I could. 2 cases in the trunk, 5 in the back seat, and 1 case of old granddad in the seat beside me. I didn't forget the crowbar, and with my face covered with sweat, I drove away. Grand and Summit were too risky, so I took Portland, driving past our apartment where my heartbroken mother and sister were sleeping. If my mother could have seen me, she'd have had her own heart attack. I had to hurry. Time was running out on me, and I pulled in behind the liquor store with the lights off and waited as the car passed on Pryor. I left the engine running and carried the crowbar to the back door. I took the liquor ahead of time, so I'd only be in the store about 2 seconds and not get caught. In the dark, I slid the crowbar in place and pried it with everything I had. The door groaned. The crowbar slipped. I kept jamming it into the crack like a man-bed, but I was so jittery I missed half the time. I kept prying, and then an alarm went off, clanging bloody murder like a fire drill at school, and it was rattling me and I could hardly breathe. I strained on until I could feel my face bulging, and then door finally broke free. I slid it open, hustled into the storeroom, shoving cases around and making it look like a robbery. I could hear the grainy voice of the old judge pronouncing sentencing on me. 5 years in the state penitentiary, while the jangling alarm was waking everyone in North America. I bombed out of the storeroom and into the Plymouth, and when I shifted into first and let out the clutch, the car lurched forward and stopped dead. I'd killed the engine. Criminy, the clanging bell drove spikes into my brain. I pushed the starter. Geez, I forgot. It wouldn't work without a key. I was blowing it. They'd catch me again. Bit off more than I could chew. Bit off more than I could chew. Sweat ran on off my forehead. The screwdriver. Where's the screwdriver? I fumbled in the dark and found it on the floor. The burglar alarm was driving me nuts. The burglar alarm was driving me nuts, and I started to panic. I opened the hood and jumped the starter. The engine caught and idled. I slammed the hood, slid into the car, and gunned the engine while I carefully let out the clutch. The Plymouth roared away like I was drag racing on Lake Street. I hoped someone who heard the alarm would see the car as I swung up Grand, 2 blocks to Latcher's drugstore. Headlights appeared down Grand, and I slowed, waiting for the car to stop at Fairview and then drive on. Geez, another car came along Fairview and then stopped at the intersection. Where were they all coming from on a late Thursday night? I swung around the block for another run at it, and this time Grand was empty, and as I got near the corner, I checked the rearview mirror. The cops would be coming any second, but I had no idea from what direction. At about 10 miles an hour, I turned over the curb and rammed Letterman's Plymouth halfway through the drugstore display window. Geez, the shattering glass sounded like the whole building come down on me. The jolt of the sudden stop surprised me, and I smacked my nose on the steering wheel. I had to get out of there fast. I grabbed the screwdriver and the crowbar and tried to open the door. It was jammed. I bashed my shoulder into it, but it wouldn't budge. The right side of the car was wedged against the wall, and that door would never open. I reached over the seat trying to open the back door, but with a pile of liquor boxes, there wasn't room. I could see headlights coming up Grand. I rolled my window down and slithered out, and as I raced across the street, somehow I remembered the hot wire. With the oncoming headlights only a block away, I scrambled back to the Plymouth. The hood had popped open, and I jerked the hot wire from the engine. Then I beat it across Grand into the shadows between Smart's Texaco and an apartment building. When I crossed the alley, I heard a siren in the cool night air. I bombed around a garage, high-hurdled a hedge, and came out in the front yard on Summit. I tried to figure the direction of the siren as I sprinted up the boulevard where the runner had chased me so many times. I felt good. I had no way of knowing what would happen back there, but son of a gun, the police would be looking for Otto Letterman, and I thought enough law had been broken to put that maggot behind bars for a year or 2. I ditched the crowbar and other stuff in a garbage can and sewers while I legged it through quiet neighborhoods, all the way to Dunning Field and Central. The school stood there dark and gloomy, and I realized I'd never be going back. Never again sit in D.B. Sanderson's physics, Tony Kirchbach's 7th period, Mrs. Whaleman's study hall. I tooled over behind the stadium and gazed through the wire fence, and I could hear voices cheering and the sounds of contact on the field. I really could. But the stands were empty as an east wind blew over the deserted field, and I turned and ran from the memories. I hurried down Dunlap along Lexington Boulevard, where I shagged foul balls to get in free. When I crossed University and landed out Lexington, I felt like I did when I rode the bull moose across the bay. I hustled over the shadowed lawn of the workhouse and made it back before the deadline of midnight. The bald-headed jailer who checked me in as how I hurt my nose. Geez, I touched the swelling with my fingers and was surprised. I'd forgotten all about it. I told him I'd stumbled when I got on the streetcar. He was yawning and could hardly keep his eyes open. He picked up a pen and started to write in a big ledger. Your dad died, huh? Yeah, that's tough. Do you have to write down what time I got here? Yeah. Could you put me down for making it around 10 so my mom won't worry if she checks on me? I could have been here by then, but I went to see my girl for a while, and then I stopped at the White Castle to load up on gut bombs. I knew I'd be there. I knew I'd be in here for another 10 days. You like White Castle too? I love those tiny sinners. Yeah, sure. Let's put you down for 9.50. He worked his tongue as he jotted in the time. When I crawled onto my bunk, I couldn't sleep. What if Letterman had an alibi, a friend he visited on the night walks? Or what if he got home before the cops got there? His wife would lie and swear that he'd never left the house. Golly, all those things that could go wrong buzzed around in my head like horseflies. I was afraid my trap would never work the way it was supposed to, and if it did, if by luck it caught the rat by an ear or a foot, would it be enough to set Gretchen free? I kept waking up and worrying like crazy all night. I got up long before they rattled my cage in hopes of overhearing some words about Gretchen's father during the day. I kept my ears peeled for any bits of information about arrests and stuff from the past night, but I didn't hear anything. I had no idea what happened after I bombed away from the drugstore, and I didn't dare ask any questions. New faces showed up with their crimes in the last 24 hours, but Letterman wasn't one of them. When I thought about all that could have gone wrong, I tried to escape by sleeping, but I kept thinking about my dad and Gretchen and Lola. It scared me when I saw how fast everything I loved could be lost. The next day, Saturday, I spent part of the time degreasing a big iron cook stove in the kitchen and listening for crumbs of information that might fall from the jailer's tables. On Sunday, I went nuts waiting for a visitor, anyone, but the visiting hours were slipping by. When a guard finally called me to the visitor's room, I thought I'd find my mother waiting for me. It was Steve who showed up. Criminy, was I glad to see him, and we talked about school and things and stayed away from stuff about my dad, and it was almost like we were pretending that I wasn't in jail. After a few minutes, I couldn't stand it any longer. Have you seen Gretchen in school? Gretch the wretch? Haven't you heard? Her dad stabbed a cop. They caught him breaking into a liquor store. He's in jail. Holy Toledo, it had worked. But stabbed a cop? It was like I'd been hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. I wanted to jump up and shout, but I was scared stiff at what I had started and how I might be in big trouble. Geez, I tried not to look too excited. How's the cop? Gonna be okay, they say. Gretchen's father must be some kind of nut. What happened to Gretchen? I don't know. Haven't seen her. I suppose she's feeling terrible. I bet she didn't, but I still couldn't believe it. I never figured he'd stab a cop or anything like that, but it worked. Gretchen was free. She wouldn't go crazy. But now it was her turn to finish the rat by telling them how he murdered Helga's baby. How long is Gretchen's dad going to go be in jail? I said. Don't know. Is he in here? Could be. I've never seen the guy. I kind of shivered. They'd have to keep Letterman in jail for 2 or 3 years for stabbing a cop, wouldn't they? You got something going with Gretchen's dad, Steve said. What do you mean? Geez, I held my breath. I must have left some big clue. Well, you're both hitting the same liquor store, so I thought you might be in the same gang. Steve sprayed the room, and I started breathing again, wishing I could tell him how close he was to the truth. My mother came for the last 15 minutes, and Steve gave up his place to her. I thanked him for coming, though I'd never been able to tell him what terrific news he'd brought. My mother had read about it in the papers, and she'd seen Latcher's drugstore window all boarded up. She'd absent-mindedly left the one curler in her hair, and I didn't have the heart to tell her, knowing how embarrassed she'd be. Wasn't that terrible? A stabbing right in our neighborhood. The paper said one of the girls of the families went to Central. Maybe you know her, Cal. Letterman? Letterman? No, I don't think so. When my mother left, I sat on my bunk and I was so excited I couldn't think straight. I couldn't believe it. Letterman was in jail. It had worked better than I had planned. Then dread blasted me. When all she had to do was tell them what he'd done, would Gretchen be able to beat back her fear and slam the bolt on her father's cell, or would she be too scared to finish him? The last week went on forever, and I worked hard, asking for more to do than when I ran out. Nights were the hardest. I could hear all the gross noises of the derelicts and rummies, and I fought back memories and regrets, seeing my father's face and hearing Lola's laugh. But Sunday morning came, and I'd paid my debt to society. I told Spence I'd come and visit him. No, you won't, was all the old guy would say. They opened the steel-barred door, and I walked into the gray spring drizzle like I was in sunshine. It felt good, and my whole body let out a sigh like I'd been holding my breath too long underwater. The spring rain felt clean, and when I'd walk a block, I glanced back at the soggy-looking workhouse. I'd learned what it was to be locked up, and I remembered Spence's word, and I knew how brave they were. Spence and all those lonely men, and I caught the Como Harriet for home. Harriet. When I stepped off the streetcar on the corner of Fairview, it had stopped raining, and I looked kitty-corner at Latcher's drugstore, where the front window had been fixed, and the new brick in the wall below the glass was only sign of a smash-up. Little by little, I'd pay back every cent of the damage I'd done, but I didn't know how yet. Without someone finding out, I did it. My father taught me to pay for what I broke, and I figured all along Sid would get his liquor back. But darn it, I didn't want to pay for the damage to the car. Like I wanted to smash something of Letterman's if I couldn't smash him. I wished I could go to Gretchen's house and see her, but I knew that was out. I glanced across at Finley's Market, and I wanted to explain it to him, but I didn't know how. A Grand Mississippi car came the other way, and when I caught myself checking to see if it was my dad's, I turned and ran for home.